And now, a NewsChannel 13 special presentation, Suicide Survival, Hope in the Darkness, with your host, Jerry Gretzinger.
Good evening, I'm Jerry Gretzinger. Thanks for joining us. For the next hour, we're going to do something that most people find uncomfortable. We're going to talk about suicide. Consider this. According to the CDC, in 2019, there were 19,141 homicides in the U.S. There were more than 47,000 suicides. Young and old, men and women, every race and orientation. 47,000 people who felt it was their only option. How do we not talk about that? Tonight, you're going to meet 5 courageous people who were all touched by suicide. Some lost loved ones, some nearly lost themselves. Each has found hope. September is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and the Suicide Prevention Center of New York found these people ready to share their very personal and emotional stories as they try to help others find hope in the darkness. I know suicide is not always an easy topic for people to want to discuss, and that's whether they've known someone that they've lost to suicide or they themselves have considered it or attempted it. But I want to thank each of you for being here today to talk about this important topic with us, with our viewers, and sharing your experiences. And with that in mind, I want to start with that. I want you to go one by one. Tell us who you are, introduce us to yourselves, and let us know your personal experience. What brings you to be a part of this panel today?
Yeah, I'm Dan Egan. Currently, I'm the board chair for the Capital Region chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I also serve on our National Loss and Healing Council. My connection to the cause is that 31 years ago, when I was a freshman in college, I lost my father to suicide. You know, to say that I dealt with it poorly would be give the impression that I dealt with it at all. You know, I really suppressed it for a number of years until later in life I dealt with my own anxiety that for about a period of 6 months was nearly crippling. You know, at that point I realized I needed to get help. Went and sought counseling, and then eventually reached a point where I thought my story could help others travel an easier path. So I've been volunteering with AFSP in various roles for the past 14 years.
My name is Tim. I guess my connection would be a few years ago I had my own crisis. I've lived with mental illness my whole life, but I guess it didn't really come to a halt until a couple of years ago. Again, when I had my crisis, I was fortunate enough to be involved in a 5.5 week intense outpatient program, and which I learned a lot of things, came out and wanted to learn more, so I just kind of continued it. So I guess I'm just a mental health advocate, mental health podcaster, and supporter of awareness and prevention.
My name is Kim. I lost my oldest son, Randy, in April of 2011, 10 years ago. I also volunteer with the AFSP. I'm the Lifekeeper Memory Quilt organizer for the Capital District. And also I am the site lead for the Schenectady Survivor Day, International Survivor of Suicide Loss Day, in our Schenectady site.
Hi, I'm Will Foley. Thank you very much for having us here today to talk about this very important topic. I'm actually a podcaster. Tim and I created Above Ground podcast in 2019 to talk about our own mental health struggles. But I also am a volunteer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I was on the board up until the beginning of this year where I stepped down. I also have my peer support certification through New York State. I come to this on all facets. My mother has attempted twice, and I live with my own mental illness, and I had my own struggles in 2013, and I was considering suicide and putting a plan together. And with help from my family and friends and professional help and a long road to recovery, I'm here still to share my story, and I feel I've had a mandate placed on me to share it, so that's why we're still here. And thank you for having us.
Hi, I'm Stephen Yacz. I'm from Central New York. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I've been a volunteer firefighter since 1982, and I have known some people who have attempted and were successful. I've also known some people who have attempted and were not successful because of people catching them in time. I also attempted myself in 2015. I had one of the worst crises of my life, and thankful for my service dog. She saved my life from it. I also, at that time, needed to do something. I needed more of a purpose. And I decided to take a look in first responders suicides. And I just want to share one statistic. In 2019, there were 48 firefighters killed in a line of duty death, which means at a fire they passed away or had something related to it. There were 119 suicides by first responders in that year. And that's where my passion is now. I want to get the word out to first responders. First responders think that they have to be Superman, Superwoman. They don't need to. They can step down and be human beings. And that's my passion, and that's what brought me here today. Thank you.
Steve, you mentioned Luna, the service dog who's here with you, and we're just going to point her out because, as you say she saved your life, and
yes.
The role that she plays in your life is important. So I want to make sure that people know that she's here. And she's a very good girl. She's very patient with us as we get this going.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about this, and that's the first thing I want to talk about. Each of you have just shared with me and with all of us what brings you here today, and the moments that were difficult that you persevered through. And you were here to talk about it today. And as I said when we started talking about this, sometimes for many people it's something they just don't think should be done. They say, oh, we don't talk about that. Let's not discuss it. Let's not get into it. Feel free to jump in here, but why is it so important that that not be the case, that we do actually talk about this, talk about these experiences that you've had?
I been called the Grim Reaper in my county because I talk about two topics that firefighters don't want to deal with. They're in denial of. One is cancer and one is suicide. Being this on a suicide talk, people don't want to look at it. They don't want to admit to the fact that they have post-traumatic stress, or they have something that leads them to thinking that they may have failed their responsibility as a first responder. They failed because they couldn't save someone for whatever reason. I carried that with me for over 30 years. As a matter of fact, let's just quickly go through a quick story. Back in 1988, there was a really bad fire in Spring Valley. We lost 3 kids and a grandmother. The one kid was right in the picture window, and I'll never forget that. I had to go through therapy to get out of that, and that was part of my struggle in 2015. And first responders have to realize that they can't be the super person that they want to be. They need to understand that they have their own issues too, and they need to address them so that they can be good first responders.
I think for me it was big when I lost my dad. I felt really alone and isolated. I didn't realize there were people out there who were going through the same thing and would understand. Literally decades later, I found out that someone I knew in college and lived in the same building had lost their brother to suicide in a similar time frame. So, there you have two folks who could definitely support each other who had no idea that they were near each other at the time. So it's that feeling of togetherness and letting people know that they're not alone. Because I've spoken out, friends have felt comfortable coming to me and talking about issues, and sharing their stories, and then helping them get the help they need.
So they know that they can approach you.
Exactly. They know it's safe to talk to you about it because it's a safe place, and that's important.
I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about it because they don't know how to talk about it. And coming from this type of background where we've all had our own experiences with anxiety or depression or a suicide attempt or ideation, you feel very isolated, but it's hard to talk about it if you don't have a language to say, my emotions are a mess, or I'm feeling depressed, or going through a midlife, like anything. It's just hard for people to talk because I don't think that they know the words to say, and that's where they stumble, because words can be clumsy.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I use, I don't know if it's a friendly term or not, but I use the term suicide etiquette just because, people, we look at them like, oh, well, they're not bringing it up, and some people may look at them as a negative person, but they may want to bring it up, but they just don't know how to start a conversation or what words to say. I mean, even I think all of us could agree, even if we stumbled across someone who lost a family member, it's still hard for us to say, like, how can we, be there for that person or just tell them, hey, I'm sorry, kind of thing. There's more to it than that. There's by talking and having these conversations, you can actually save lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think grief in general, people, want to put a timeline on it, and we always say there's no timeline on grief, especially to suicide loss, because as a parent, your time has been just flipped backwards. You're supposed to watch your kids graduate, have children of their own, you know, but and then you want to have conversations with people, and they always ask you about your children. For me, as a you know, child loss survivor, you know, what do you say? You know, what do you say to people?
Right.
Oh, I have, you know, you don't know what to say to people, you know. So grief in general, people want to put a timeline on, you should be over it, but here I am 10 years later. I mean, you have good days, you have bad days. I mean, it's
yep. And I think with the first responders especially, it's very similar to having played sports when I was younger and knowing a bunch of athletes in college. You're kind of conditioned to not say anything that's going to take you off the field or out of work in general. You know, and this is even a step beyond that, because not only is it not a physical ailment that you wouldn't fess up to necessarily, because you still want to do your job, it's something that's kind of taboo to talk about. So it just kind of adds that extra layer, I think, for the folks on our front lines.
And you know, I think in this conversation, I think you had mentioned that there's this feeling of isolation when you're in that moment and you're having these thoughts.
Yes.
And then another of you talked about how you feel like, well, I shouldn't bring this up, it's taboo, I shouldn't talk about how I'm feeling. So I want to go to another piece of this. We hear a lot of times people say, if you notice somebody exhibiting certain behaviors, whatever, you know, and we'll get to those a little bit later, they encourage those people to talk to people, to ask them, how are you doing, what's going on? Talk to me about the importance of that, you know, if you are worried about someone, again, you know, we just through society, we think, oh, well, we shouldn't bring that up. We shouldn't ask them if this is something they're considering, but at the same time, that could be the one thing that really makes a difference.
I just wanted to say one thing first. I kind of want to dispel the biggest myth about suicide, and that is if you ask somebody if they are thinking about taking their life, ending their life, or saying the word suicide around them, it's going to put the idea in their head. And it doesn't. The idea was already there. The isolation was already there. The hole was already there. So it really just takes somebody like maybe one of us who has a little bit of experience with it to just see something in someone that they wouldn't be able to express, that actually gives them a space to open up.
Yeah, and I was going to echo that sentiment with a personal experience from one of the friends who reached out to me. You know, something I could tell when he called just was a little bit off, so I asked if I could come over and see him. And like you said, just flat out asked him, I said, hey, are you thinking of hurting yourself? And he's like, yeah, it's just, you know, the thought's already there. He was like, it's just on my list of to-do. You know, go to the grocery store, take my own life. You know, and it's sit with him, talk to him, get him to commit to going to get help. You know, I knew he wasn't in a crisis at that moment, because typically the suicidal crisis is a relatively short window that you can get folks past. You know, and he's doing great. This was several years ago. And just because we were able to talk about it, he is.
And I know, and you had said, talk to people like us who, you know, who have experience, who know a little something about it. But I would think too, you know, and Kim, perhaps you want to talk about this. I know there are young people out there who have these thoughts, and they may have parents who sit back and look at their children and they wonder, why are they behaving this way? Why are they exhibiting these behaviors?
Well,
what can I do? What can I say?
I can look back to, you know, the couple years before, and yeah, now I can see the signs. You know, the withdrawing from the sports, and my son used to play violin, and it was really, really good academically. And he started withdrawing. He was sleeping more, he was agitated more, but you know, I had 2 teenage boys, so I thought that's what teenage boys did, you know. I didn't know any different. But now looking back, after losing my son, I can see a lot more of the signs. There is programs that the FSP has programs that can come into the school and educate peers and teachers and principals and guidance counselors, and you know, to help with those warning signs and to make safe people to go to in the school itself, you know, because you know, not all kids want to go to their parents, especially when they're struggling with something like that, to tell them how they're really truly feeling.
And certainly not when they're teenagers. It's
no,
probably the last
it's, you know,
person they want to talk to.
You know, a lot of kids,
Right.
they sleep, they eat, they play video games, you know, they go to school, you know, you don't always see the big picture.
And especially
you know?
for our kids when they go to college, you know, when a kid's in a new situation, sometimes they're without that normal support group of friends that they've grown up with. So it's even more important to make sure we're checking on them and looking for the warning signs.
So for those of you who lost a loved one, talk about, and you did this just now a little bit, but talk about, so people at home can hear it, the signs that even if it's in hindsight, were present. You know, we see them on the list now, but sometimes you don't put 2 and 2 together, like you were saying. until it's in hindsight. What were the things that you remember seeing? What were the things that you remember seeing, if, and I know it's been a number of years, but that sort of, raised an alarm?
So again, like my dad, unique growing up situation, lived in a different state. So he was present, but he wasn't always physically present. For the time, we're talking in the late 80s, early 90s, he was actually a little bit ahead of the curve in that he did get treatment. He did go inpatient. He was a nuclear physicist for the Air Force and was working for the EPA at the time. The issue with him was medication. The medication at the time made him feel like he was becoming less intelligent. So some of the signs we didn't see were he faked it really well. Like he actually stopped taking his medication. But, you'll see him become more withdrawn. Sometimes there's almost like an elation at the end when someone has a plan. They seem to get better for a brief period where they seem more of their normal self. But that still doesn't mean they're not going to go through a crisis. So for me, it's a little hard to recognize those in him. I've been around other folks who unfortunately have died by suicide as well, and have seen some of it, but not as much as you would like to.
Yeah, had I seen the signs and known that, I was one of the few people that didn't see the signs. So, obviously we would have gotten him help, So when I say I was blindsided, I was blindsided. But yeah, just what I said, the withdrawing from family events and, somebody that was really into baseball and cross-country track and, winning awards for all that. And then suddenly, middle school, high school hits, and all those things are no longer important. But again, teenagers do change friends, I remember being that age and, shifting a little bit, but.
And just to add something to that, let's not forget hormones.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget the chemical changes that, because I can speak from my own personal experience. I had like this darkness that kind of penetrated me around 9 years old that I literally felt thump me off the chest. I kid you not. And I'd never noticed it until like my teenage years. And my teenage years were pretty chaotic in my own mind. And I think that's where we lose a lot of our youth, is because their brains aren't developed yet. They're going through all these chemical changes, and then you throw on emotions, schoolwork, dating, just life in general, and wow, you got a recipe for disaster.
That was one of the things that, we were like, okay, he's just about to graduate. This is April of his senior year, went through his backpack trying to, was he failing? Was he not going to graduate? You look, again, everybody would say the whys. You want to know the whys, but he's the only one that really knew.
Right.
So,
and for the survivors, I think sometimes it's easy to get stuck in those whys.
And it takes a long time for you to get over the why.
For me, it was the, why wasn't I important enough? Because my dad's suicide
why didn't
was
I get there
5
sooner?
days
Why?
after my 19th birthday. Yeah. And it's like, how could the smartest person I know not realize this would be? But they're in a place where they're just in unimaginable pain is the way to imagine it. And it's the only way they see out. They can't see that light. They can't see that next day. And that's why I do this, is to help other people be able to see that light, even if it's a flicker, if you can see it.
I think that kind of piggybacking off of what Dan said, there's accountability that needs to be had for each and every individual, and when you slide down into that hole, it robs you of everything that could possibly help you get out of that. So it's a real a sickness, if you will, and I think one thing that we need to look at is it's not a one-size-fits-all. There are warning signs, but the warning signs may not fit every individual.
Right.
I think this is a reason why it needs to be talked about. I think mental health programs need to be put into the education system and start young, so we talk about it. And you can't talk about suicide prevention without talking about suicide postvention. There's so many avenues and variables to this.
Yeah, because ultimately we want to prevent suicide.
Exactly.
That's what we're
and
for.
And to piggyback on this, there's a stigma talking about suicide, and there is a stigma talking about suicide prevention, where if I say to you suicide prevention, possibly, and I can't speak for you, but most of the time what pops into someone's head is the crisis hotline. Is someone who's at the end, needs immediate intervention, right? Someone who needs to be rushed to the hospital. But if I say cancer prevention, now you move back to getting your screenings when you're young, taking your testings, doing your self-checks at home.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to move this conversation, is we need to move suicide prevention. Obviously, we're always going to be there for those folks who are in crisis. Just like you wouldn't turn away a stage 4 cancer patient. We're going to be there and trying to get them through it, but we need to normalize talking about our mental health way back here. You know, if you think about our life, our physical health journey starts before we're born. Our mental health journey doesn't start until we hit some kind of crisis. You know, for most of us, there are some people who luckily have some proactive steps built in, but for the most part, it doesn't start until we hit a crisis. Maybe it's teenage years, maybe it's 9, you know, for Will. But I don't know if you got help at that point, but that's kind of when the journey at least starts. You know, how do we get people to talk about it at an earlier age as a positive?
The culture we live in is more reactive,
Right.
and not proactive.
And responsive.
So we wait for a crisis. We wait for that to happen.
Yeah. And you know, and just to go to what you were saying a moment ago, you compared it to, you know, a cancer hotline or cancer prevention, and you talk about the culture, about how when there used to be a time when no one spoke about cancer. It was the C word, right? And because nobody talked about it, nobody learned about it. Nobody knew what to do if they saw the signs of it. And similarly, I think with suicide, it continues to be that culture of don't talk about it. And because of that, there's not enough education about it.
Right. There's not enough education. There's not enough funding into research. You know, for me as a sports person, I always go back to, and you probably remember it, the Jim Valvano speech. At the time, research into cancer was outpaced by research into AIDS. You know, and rightfully so. They both, obviously, there's no bad causes to donate to. And I think it was, I can't remember the exact, you know, was it 5-1? But right now, you know, I think breast cancer, for example, research into that outpaces suicide prevention probably 10-1. And that's just one form of cancer. People don't see the need to research it, and like Tim talked about, it's not a one-size-fit-all, because then I'll even talk openly about myself. I deal with anxiety and depression. Is it genetic? You know, I had a father who died by suicide. Is it situational? At the time I had my worst anxiety break, I was in a highly stressful position. I was really at the end of my rope. Or is it physical? You know, I've had near double-digit concussions in my lifetime. You know, and have actually lost a classmate from Syracuse, Chris Gedney, to suicide, and he had CTE at the time. So we don't have the tools to really diagnose all of those things at this point. You know, and how do we get the dollars to help us move that bar to a place where we're in a better place?
Dan, I also wanted to just point out one thing before, because it kind of leads into you too, because we always talk about physical health. We always talk about physical health. You gotta go to the gym. You gotta take your walks. You gotta eat vegetables. We never talk about mental health. We all have mental health. We don't all have mental illness. We just, mental illness and these types of things are a spectrum that goes from one side to the other. Some moderate anxiety all the way to the end, which the end of the battle of depression is suicide. I mean, that's the end.
Right.
There's no other way out of it generally.
That's one thing that we're missing with the teenagers, that there's been a lot of bullying going on. And that sometimes plays into the role of where younger adults will take their life. I remember being bullied when I was younger. Where back then they didn't have any bullying program. And I ended up getting myself into a little bit of trouble because I went after the bully and I beat him up. And people were cheering me on. That changed. You do that today, you're in a lot of trouble.
Right.
And if you report a bully, it makes you look like a bad person. And a lot of teenagers chose to go that way. We did have a younger first responder in my area attempt, and he was successful. The mother was so brave, and I've talked to Tim and Will about that earlier, that she talked about what she did. She had a checklist. She did everything she possibly could for her child, and he ended up still going. And we were wondering about that because we were at the services, and she was in front of everyone, telling everyone, if you're feeling this way, please get help. I don't want to go through this.
Yeah, the truth is that if you're in a position like that, if you are in that darkness, it really doesn't matter what safeguards are out there, what help is out there. When you are in that place, it is like being in the center of a big room like this room with the lights off, and you have to find the light switch. And a lot of times, you're not going to find the light switch.
But I think too, like, and you can probably attest to it, because we've built those support structures, knowing our situations, that if people are doing that proactively, it's a lot easier for you to get through.
Right.
It's a lot easier for me when I hit my, right, like I know my struggles, and you said it best, mental health is health.
If you're in that hole in that moment, you don't know
Right.
about it. And the cognitive,
Yeah, that's not the time to learn about
dissonance
it.
is-
the dissonance and the cognitive distortions that are in your head. You could have somebody saying, hey, we can help you, hey, I care about you, and it doesn't matter what they say. You know, what matters is what you're feeling inside.
So what is it that helped these people find hope in the darkness, that inspired them to share their stories? We'll find out after a quick break. You talked before about your moment of crisis. You talked about how you experienced that, and here you are today. You know, you've got the podcast. You're working through that. You're working to help other people. But I want to kind of go from the conversation we were having about what we can do to help others to ask you, what is it that helped you? I mean, so you were in that moment. Was it people coming forward and talk? What was it that helped bring you to see the light that we're talking about?
To be honest with you, it was kind of my own. I kind of sat there on the bathroom floor and said, I'm either going to end this or I'm going to do something to make it get better. And it was my choice. It was, you know, I thankfully have a good therapist, and she recommended the program that I went into. I was reluctant about it, but because it was group therapy and my anxiety got to me, but I knew that, again, that was my choice. It was not go on or get better. So I think one of the things for me that, you know, to get better was being in groups of peers that experience things that you experience and can talk openly about it. And you can identify with that and make connections. I mean, connections, you know, are at the basis of all vulnerabilities. So you can open up, and once a conversation starts, it just kind of flows from there. And
so you sought things to help support you through this.
Correct.
And what you sought, and you found what you needed to help you through that.
Thankfully,
There
yes.
was peer groups you could talk to, other information.
Yes.
My experience is I actually reach out before I actually attempt, and I couldn't get through. I needed to talk to someone, and I couldn't get through. That person said 24/7, call me. They weren't available. So my attempt was stopped by her because she knew something was going on. But my point that I want to bring out is that if you say you're available 24/7, make sure you're available 24/7. You know, I always tell people, if you need to talk about something, anything, I'm available, but keep in mind, after 10 o'clock, I may be asleep. So just text me, and then I'll try to get back to you, or keep trying. Call 211, whatever the number is in the area for suicide prevention, or reach out to people. And it works, because I don't want to carry that guilt, not to say I'm available and I'm not available. And I like to make that known, that when people say that, just make sure you're available when they call, because I didn't have that.
Wow, that's important. So we've talked about the different age groups, I guess, that are susceptible, and I guess we did some research. And when we first were planning this panel, we had 4 gentlemen, and I know we hadn't gotten confirmation that you were able to be here yet. And we thought, well, we don't want to make this seem like it's strictly a male issue, that men are dealing with this. But then we looked and we found that middle-aged men are one of the high-risk groups.
We are the high-risk group.
Yeah. We're up there, one of the highest.
One of the highest risk groups we are.
Because we don't, like you said, we'll talk about health, but we won't talk about mental health. You know, most of us, as an I won't call myself an athlete, but I played sports. I've got scars, from surgeries, from injuries, and each one of those has a story that you'll share. But, all our mental health leaves a scar in some level, and those aren't as comfortable for folks to share. It's not something you sit around. I do, but a lot of people won't.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah, we're a unique group,
we're a
like
unique
with
group
Will
of,
and Tim.
of people.
Yeah,
and it's great to and I'm so happy that Kim is here. But it's also very awesome to be with 3 other gentlemen that are involved in this type of thing, and it does make you feel less alone. It makes you feel like, hey, I am part of a part of a little team here and there, you know.
Yeah, and, you know, you talk about this too, and you were talking about the sports, and you know, it's good to be with 3 other men who are openly talking about this. There is that old belief that, you know, the guys got to be tough. They can't show any weakness. They need to be able to muscle through anything. Do you find that maybe finally there's a crack in that dam a little bit, because here you guys are talking about this, and hopefully we're not the only ones.
I do think you see it. You see it on a national level a little bit more too. You'll see more folks stepping outside their box and talking about it, whether it's a Solomon Thomas, Dak Prescott sharing his struggles after his brother's suicide, Kevin Love in the NBA.
I actually believe that it was the guitar player, one of the guitar players in Anthrax, just put out that he was getting off the tour because his mental health is not doing good.
Right, and you're right. For me, it was the no, I shouldn't have to talk to anybody about this. I'm tough. I've got this. And you reach a point where you realize the strongest people I know are the ones who know when to ask for help. You know,
Absolutely.
It's hard, and it's making yourself vulnerable, and just learning that. You know, takes way more strength than pretending it doesn't exist.
That makes me think about when you talk about, you know, musicians and famous people. When you want to get people on board to help support the cause, when you think about the famous people in the past decade even that have taken their life, and if one of those people would just maybe get behind
and
the
some
cause,
have,
you know?
but it seems like it's always a struggle.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if there was ever a physical ailment that at the height of it was taking the lives of 22 veterans a day, I imagine the amount of money that would come pouring in would be astronomical.
Yeah. I listened to XM radio when I listened to Octane, and one of the girls every day, right around 3 o'clock, she shares the Lifeline on air, and then she plays a Linkin Park song because Chester Bennington had taken his life. So it's like, that little bit though, you know, she says you share it with somebody else, you don't know who you're going to help. So,
absolutely.
You know, so that little bit just
And the first responders, they're like, no, I don't want to talk about that because I may lose my job. So we're in the stage right now where we have a couple of retired firefighters that are bringing it up. And they're saying, look, yeah, I know I retired, but this is what really happened when I was there. We've got to stop it. We got to say, okay, it's okay to say this, and you're not Superman. And it's a real serious issue because people don't want to show that they're vulnerable, especially in there. They don't want to be stigmatized or stereotyped as weak because they thought about suicide or they bringing up mental health issues. So there's ways to go around it, and chime in if you want, without having to say suicide. Hey, what's going on? I know that you're acting different in the firehouse. What's going on? I mean, you want to go for a cup of coffee, you don't have to talk about it here after work. Try to get away from the area where people, if they hear something, they'll start, you know, saying things behind their back and, you know, taking them from their job. And some of those guys really love their job. They're just struggling with one little thing that they need help with. And they can't get the help because they're afraid that someone's going to come at them and say, hey, you're too weak for this. You have to leave. And we can't do that.
Well, I just think, you know, with your question and then kind of what Steve was saying, I think it's built into the system, unfortunately. I think there's this, you know, system built that, you know, again, the older generation, it's like, oh, well, I got something wrong with me, I'm just going to brush it off. You know, and then if you do that, some, you know, deem you as weak, which, you know, and then some people are going to feel that pressure. You know, some people, you know, like myself, I don't really care what somebody thinks of me, so it's easier for me to do something like that because I know that I have to do something for myself. If you are in a, you know, an emergency situation in an airplane, the masks fall. What do they tell you? The first thing they tell you to put it on yourself first because you're no good to anybody else. Right. If you're not good.
You know, and I'm just going to, I guess this may be more of an observation off of something that one of you just said, not so much a question, but I think you had talked about that if a celebrity is battling a horrible disease and makes it through it, they will stand up as, you know, hey, I did it, you can do it, I'm going to help support this cause and help others through it, but not so much when it comes to something like suicide.
It's getting better.
Right, it's a great question though, because
it's getting better. I mean,
our
losses,
our losses are so visual, you know, and there's not a point where you have a recovery to celebrate. It's always going to be an ongoing process for someone who's dealing with it, you know. So there's not going to be that cancer ring the bell. We got through it.
Recovery is not a linear process by any stretch. And recovery is, to me, my own definition of recovery is just uncovering what's always been there. And you just have to remove the layers of all the stuff that has gotten dumped on you. And you may get 3 layers off one day, but 5 layers come back. So it's never, every day is never the same.
No, it's not.
So
every day is different. After you attempt or prior to attempting, it's the same thing. I deal with my issues all the time. And I'm glad that I went through therapy for EMDR, because I was able to get past that little baby that I lost. I took it on myself, even though it was a whole fire department and some of my other things that I've dealt with. I had a friend attempt. She wasn't successful. I was in Michigan. I called from Michigan to Onondaga County and told them, hey, that's what's going on. And that also added to my post-traumatic stress. And there's a whole story with that. I won't get into it. But I had to learn how to deal with that, because I was being blamed for it, just to add to that. And I had to stop all that stuff for a while, and it was getting toxic for me. So I had to remove myself from some of the stuff. But I learned these things by listening to these guys, by researching suicide on my own, by joining a peer support group out in Illinois for training to see where I can help people. And it came at my expense because I'm passionate about this. But not many of these first responders are passionate about mental health. They're like Tim said, brush it off.
Yeah, and I think a lot of you just made a very good point too, that if there are people out there who are seeing this, that have had these thoughts, and they make it through, but then things roll back. They shed 3 layers but gain 5 back a week later, to let them know that that's not necessarily unusual. I mean, that's to be expected.
Right. It's kind of, for me, it was learning what triggers my anxiety. Understanding when I feel it coming, how to calm it down. If I do end up going into a period of anxiety, also understanding when I come out of that, I'm going to have kind of a crash. So there's going to be a couple days where my depression's pretty bad because I have all this energy, and then it's all gone.
Kim, how is it for you as a parent to deal with the, were you looked at differently after your son passed away?
You feel like you are. After the services are over and the people stop bringing you dinners and sending you flowers and calling you and checking in on you, the reality sets in. Because again, grief in general, people think, when all that's done, you don't need any more support.
Right.
So little things like going to the supermarket in my local community, it'd be like, I feel like everybody's looking at me. Oh, there's a girl whose son took his life. There's Kim. You know what I mean? But most of those people didn't even know me from Adam. You know what I mean? It was and when Dan talked about the reactive part of, when somebody dies by suicide, I can honestly say that my son's school district did bring in our programs and say we're going to do this, and they created this sources of strength, which my youngest son at the time was 16. His brother was 18 when he died. He was on that peer program where to be a source of strength for a kid or kids that were struggling, rather than go to an adult or a parent that they could go and talk to. And time went on, and it just kind of dissipated.
I was just going to ask, do they still?
To my knowledge, they don't. And then a couple years later, there was a bullying issue in that same school, and it kind of came to the forefront again. And then
that's what happens. I feel like that's what happens with celebrities. Yeah. They get a spotlight on them.
And then it.
Exactly, with the Anthony Bourdain.
But look at the times that we're living in right now. I mean, I don't have young children in school anymore, and I'm looking at all these parents right now with what they've been going through with COVID and having the kids home, and then the kids go to school, and then, oh, nope, they can't go to school today. They got to go home. It's homeschool this week. I'm like, I was really concerned this past year and a half for kids' mental health, and there's only so much I can do, but I kept saying, hey, how are your kids doing? Oh, they're good. Are you sure? I kept asking those questions. You just make sure that they're getting some kind of socialization. You can't keep your kids locked in a, this virus has been, terrible on everybody, but you can't lock your kids in your house and not
Kim,
have anything.
I just want to ask you too. I mean, the unfortunate reality is there are other parents out there who are in a similar situation. Who've lost a child to suicide. It's been 10 years now?
10 years, yeah, 10 years in April. Yeah.
So I don't think anybody can imagine what that journey has to be like, you know, dealing with that and then trying to put your life back together and getting to a point where you can talk about it like you are today.
It's been a roller coaster.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I mean, what could you say to those people too? Because that's another aspect of this. I mean, for parents who have to find a way forward.
I had a choice through my employer. You know, I could have gone on leave of absence, or after 3 weeks, go back to work. And I made that choice to go back to work, and I'm glad that I did, because my coworkers and my company actually ended up being the biggest support system I had. The people that sometimes you think are going to be your support system, your friends, your family, they might not be the people that are going to support you in this type of loss, because they have to deal with the loss themselves too, you know. But I got involved in our local survivor group. It's called Survivors of Loved Ones to Suicide, which was a support group of peers that had lost children, brothers, sisters, cousins, a friend. And I found talking to those people that had that same loss helped me, because they could truly understand that feeling.
And if I could sneak in a quick plug for a couple of things we do, there are the 2 suicide loss survivor groups in the Albany area. I know there are a few a little further out, like I think there's one in Glens Falls. The advent of COVID and the growth of Zoom has made it so there are online support groups. Things like that can be found at our website, afsb.org, and there's a spot where it says find support. We also have a program called Healing Conversations, which allows folks to schedule a more intimate conversation with someone who shared a similar type loss. You know, so it would allow Kim, when she had first lost someone, to meet with another parent who's further along in their loss. You know, or if someone loses a parent, sometimes they'll get to talk to me when it goes down. You know, to kind of let them know that they're not alone. There are resources. You know, there's people that understand. Every year there's an International Survivor of Suicide Loss Day. It's the Saturday before Thanksgiving, which this year is, I believe, November 20th.
Yeah, I don't have to.
And we have sites throughout the area. For the first time this year, we're doing a site exclusive for veterans and first responders. It'll be a site to be determined. We'll put it up on our website. But it's a great day of healing for folks who have shared this kind of loss, or to go to one of our walks. You know, they are our fundraisers, but again, it's a community of support, you know, where you can meet and bond with folks who have shared what you've gone through.
You know, I wanted to ask a question, and we hear a lot about the impact of society today, social media, technology on young people, and what that does to them. I mean, there was just a study that came out this morning that said that many young children who think about suicide say what drove them to having those thoughts was Instagram. They specifically isolated that app as a reason why they've started to have these thoughts, that they look at other people's lives and think, well, mine is so awful. What do you feel the role of society today, technology, social media has in this? Has this made it more a bigger problem to contend with? What are your thoughts on the role it plays?
I personally feel, and this is my feeling, that social media is a tool. And we all know tools can be used for good, tools can be used for bad. And there's a yin and yang to everything. And for all the upside, there's a downside. And of course, obviously, unfortunately, the difference between children now and like when we were growing up, or some of us are growing up, or me, or whatever, was you could leave school and not have to deal with anybody from school. You can't get away from that on social media. And it doesn't matter whether you're 3 or 10 degrees separated from the people, there's somebody always that knows you in your school that's going to be on social media. And I think, I think it falls on parents to really do check in on their kids. I mean, you really do need to be aware and open and try to know what they're doing.
Right, and I think there's a huge potential upside, you know, and especially that there's some anonymity, you know, especially for folks like first responders who can't necessarily go and talk about what they're doing and their struggles. There are places online where they can go and join a support group where it doesn't get back to people, and for teenagers. But like you said, there's...
I think it's good and bad, and also, I mean, I was a big, you know, advocate for, it can help a lot of people, I know personally, You know, being able to share it, you know, share your grief and pain too. Not that you're looking for sympathy, but you can't always talk to somebody, you know. So if you're able to share something, say through Facebook or what, you know, I don't have Instagram, but people might say, hey, I'm thinking about you, or are you okay? Or they might send you a private message, hey, are you okay?
Right,
You
and
know,
for the
sharing
teens.
things, you know, I share a lot, you know, I shared something that was from like 6 years ago on my Facebook, and it was a whole story that somebody had written about what it's like to lose a child in general, but a child to suicide. And you know, then it helps you to revisit things too, to you know, because it keeps a record, you know.
I think for me it goes back to what we talked about earlier of starting that mental health with our young peoples earlier, so they understand and they're not building their expectations based on what they see on the internet. You know, that they understand that someone could be posting something on the internet and their life looks great, but they're still struggling too. You know, I think we were all blindsided by like a Robin Williams, you know, by like an Anthony Bourdain. Just because your life looks great doesn't mean your life is great.
Well, I think it has to do with more of the societal, cultural aspect of it. And, you know, again, education is key. It's a tool, but it's also, you have to understand that you control that tool. You can sign off, you can turn it off, you can put your phone down or close your laptop. You control it. So if we educate it on that side instead of pointing the finger at things, it's very easy to blame. It's much harder, and it takes more time to look at a situation, identify it, and educate, learn about it, and figure out what's going on. But that's, you know, we're losing that whole, you know, process of critical thinking. You know, if that's gone, it's easy to say, well, this is it. Sure, those are variables that a lot of us didn't have, and I think they're going to continue to get worse. And the more that certain people get famous or successful because of this, that's going to fuel it. You know, these people got famous maybe because of they got 5,000 you know, likes because of their looks, and I don't look that way. But it starts young. It's a whole self-love. It's you're worth everything, even though you don't look that way. We have worth just by waking up in the morning and getting out of bed. You know what I mean? And your worth might be different as far as your plate is different. Your plate is bigger than mine, so you can handle more. My plate is smaller, I can handle less, but that doesn't take away from either of us.
And I think it's easy to look at the numbers today and compare them to the past and be like, it's a bigger problem, but the numbers from the past aren't really accurate when it comes to suicide reporting. You know, the military didn't keep track of, I don't know the year, I don't know if anybody does, but it was late in the game.
Well, think
You're
of suicide
talking
in
within
general.
my lifetime.
Right.
They considered it a crime.
Right.
That's
and
why they
were-
used to say commit suicide.
Right, which we're trying to get away from
Yes.
saying that
The
word.
worst
You
word.
know, that's
Nowadays,
what's
the numbers for the fire service, the first responders, are really accurate because you're seeing the LODs down here and the suicide rate up here,
Right.
when it used to be the other way around.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that we're trying to stop.
Yeah.
I want to just talk on one thing about the podcast that Tim and Will do. They actually gave me courage to be here today and talk about that. This guy, Carl.
Oh, yes, Carl.
He was awesome. He was talking about some of his struggles, and he says haters are going to be haters. So you start promoting mental health, you start doing anything, people are not going to follow you because, you know, you're different, you're odd. And that's why I'm here. I'm like, you know, he hit the nail on the head for me because I knew I was getting into something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And right now, I really personally don't care how they feel about me being here talking about something that really is a big issue.
And you know what? You make a good point there because haters are going to hate.
Haters are going to hate.
Haters are gonna hate.
I mean, they may hate hearing about that conversation. They may hate the tie that I have on. But you know what? It's not about them or what they think or how they feel. Who cares? Right? I mean, that's not what's important.
It's easy to
here.
be negative in life. I've always said it's hard to make somebody laugh, to make someone smile. Like, if you can make someone smile in a day, you've done an amazing job.
Yeah.
You know, some people might hear this and look at some of us like we're broken. And it's like, no, this is just who we are. And I think we're a lot stronger and can withstand a lot more than most of them.
Still to come, some advice for those who are struggling and for loved ones who may not know how to help. Also, a real-life example of how light does emerge from the darkness. as we kind of wind down, I want to give each of you an opportunity. We talked about, we're hoping a lot of people will see this and it will mean something to them. I want to give you all an opportunity to address, if people are out there and they're at that point of crisis and they're watching this as an opportunity to get information, to learn more, what would you say to them about the light that will be there tomorrow?
Well, I get to go first. This is a tough one. You know, for me, when I've struggled in general, I always say, don't try to see the finish line. Try to see the next lap. You know, take it a leg by a leg. Shorten your expectations. If you're in a crisis, don't try to see the end of the crisis. Get through these next 15 minutes for me. You know, be here in 15 minutes. Once you've done that, can you be here for another half hour? All right, can you see tomorrow for me? You know, and for the folks who are with them, let them know you're there. You know, just reach out, give them a hug, tell them you care, tell them they're not alone. You know, it's one of the most important things you can do. Help them find someone who understands.
Well, I would probably first say that if you are on like your phone or social media, or electronics, follow positive, you know, pages, follow positivity, you know, and you know, look at these, read them, read articles, read real stories of survivors. You know, and also your worries, your troubles, they're not permanent. It'll pass. And, you know, there's also an aspect of kind of being open, being aware, and kind of routine maintenance. Let's say you own a vehicle, you own a car or a truck, you have to, you know, putting gas in it isn't enough. You have to rotate the tires, you have to check the air pressure, you have to change the oil. It's the same thing with your body.
I think, you know, on the support aspect, people that are trying to support somebody, don't be ashamed and don't be afraid to seek help for somebody. Because they're ashamed to say, oh, I took my child to the emergency room for mental health, which if they're in a crisis, you should do that. You know, you should call 911. You should call the Lifeline. Don't be ashamed and don't be afraid to do that. Because what's the other choice, you know? You leave them for a few seconds and they're gone. You know, you can't, like he said, you can't be on the phone 24/7. You can't always be there 24/7 for somebody. But if you are there in that moment, don't be ashamed to seek them help if you have to.
Yeah, seeking help is important. But you also have to realize too, if you are in a crisis yourself, and maybe not a crisis, but if you're feeling depressed, that this is not necessarily real. Like, the feelings that you're having are your emotions, and it's hard to separate yourself from your emotions. So I would suggest, if anybody is out there that needs some help, that can just reach out to one person, because peer support to me is one of the biggest and most important things that you can have around yourself. To be, even if it's just one person, but if you have one person that you can reach out to and just say, look, I'm struggling, and it buys you that time to not make a permanent decision to a temporary problem. And it's hard to see temporary problems when you're in them. And it's very important to try to get some separation.
If you got yourself to a situation where you're in a dark spot and you are struggling, if you do your permanent solution to a temporary problem, you're not going to be there for the next day, and then the next day. I was fortunate to not take my life, because now my daughter's getting married in October of this year. I never thought of it like I wouldn't be there until the other day. It dawned on me when I was talking to her. I would have never been there. And I told her, I had to tell her that I was going to be doing this, because she's all over the network. I said, look, I attempted. And she asked me why, and I gave her her reasons why, and she goes, well, I'm glad you're still here.
My husband started this thing saying, live for the next sunrise, and you say live for 15 minutes, a half hour, you know, a few hours, but
no, that's
if you can
perfect.
just get
live
through,
for that next sunrise,
get through the next, you know, the next
and
day.
And then she had me crying, because she was crying. And
You're going to get me crying.
Because of her. And she was all smiles. But she knows now. I'm getting emotional. She's like, hey, what's going on? But that is a big issue. You know, it's only a temporary thing. And I know it's hard at that moment, because I was there. I really was. I was bouncing around. I was trying to make the best of my situation. And thank you. And And eventually, I was able to get out of it. The next day was a new day. It was hard. I was exhausted because I went through all that stuff mentally. I got up, I had to drink extra cups of tea, I had to find a can of soda to keep me going that day. I actually went to work. And I probably was exhausted, but no one ever said anything. And that bothered me more because you're around people that know you. Every once in a while, I'll check in with someone. Check in with someone. Hey, you don't look so good. Are you okay today? Just talking. Doesn't have to be about, hey, you're going to take your life. Just talking to them, change their mindset. Geez, someone really does care about me. I don't have to think this way anymore. It makes a big difference. Helping someone, someone struggling. Hey, can I help you? Can I talk to you? Are you okay? It makes a huge difference in someone's life. You don't know it, but it really does. Yeah. And thank you for inviting me to this. I really appreciate being here.
Steve, I want to thank you for sharing that story about your daughter just now, and the fact that, you know, she's getting married and you're able to be there for that, because I think that really points out that you all talked about how temporary some of the problems are that you're feeling when you get to that moment of crisis, and you can't see that down the road something like that, as joyful as a wedding, can be waiting for you and will be waiting for most people, whether it's their own wedding or a relative's wedding, in a moment that they're going to be so happy that they're there for.
I also have, my heart also goes out to Kim because she's been denied that. And I know a lot of people, unfortunately, whose child have been, you know, passed away from suicide. Yeah. So my heart goes out to her. And I really appreciate her being here. That's really brave.
Yeah. I mean, as you were talking about these temporary things that you can't see that they're temporary, it reminded me of, I love music, and I think everybody has a place in their heart for music, hopefully. But maybe this is just too simple, but there's a song from the Broadway show Avenue Q, and it's called Everything in Life is Only for Now. And it just talks about how, yes, you're having all these big problems, these big issues, but you know what? It's only for now. And down the road, it'll be nothing but a memory. So hopefully people can take that from what you've said. Maybe they'll hear the song, I don't know, but to realize that they'll find that light in the dark room. And I thank you all for being here today to talk about your experiences, to share your insights, your suggestions for others. And I think, hopefully, I believe you've helped people by being here today. So thank you so much.
Jerry, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.
A powerful discussion with some very strong and courageous people. We'd like to thank the Suicide Prevention Center of New York and the Office of Mental Health for their help in putting this together. And for anyone who's battling their own darkness or knows someone who is, we've assembled a resource page on our website, WNYT.com. Check it out, share the links, the phone numbers. And if you'd like to rewatch any of this program, you'll find the whole thing on the website. Above all, don't be afraid to start a conversation and keep it going. Find the light, the hope in the darkness. Thank you for joining us.